Hello, my beautiful co-creators. Lilu here on the Juicy Living Tour, a magnificent 12-month tour across the world, meeting incredible people like this wonderful man I have by my side, which is Richard Tarnas, the famous Richard Tarnas. We were introduced by actually Dr. Grove, that really loves your work, admires your work. Can you tell us?
I love his and admire his very much.
Can you tell us more? Because you wrote many books. But I would just really love you to introduce yourself, because astrology is a passion of yours, but you're also a professor in psychology.
Yeah, professor of psychology and philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I met Dr. Groff back in 1974 at Esalen Institute, which was kind of the mother church of the human potential movement, new paradigm thinking, and the East-West encounter and so forth. This is a place in Big Sur, California, and Stan Groff was the scholar in residence. I was working on my PhD at that point, and I ended up living there for over a decade, and also so did Stan. And it was while we were there that we started noticing that there were correlations between the movements of the planets and the qualities of human experience. We were particularly studying the non-ordinary states of consciousness. Stan Groff had been and still is really the world's leading psychiatrist working with LSD therapy. And in those years, he had moved to Esalen to write up his research, and we were still working with the problem of how do we understand how people who have the same, are taking the same substance, same dosage, have such radically different experiences, or the same person could have very different experiences at different times. None of the standard psychological tests had any predictive value. And what we discovered, this was following suggestions by Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychologist, who had a lot of interest in astrology and had pursued that research for years and wrote about it. That gave us a sense that there might be something to look there. And so we did, and we were quite astonished to find that there were, in fact, very consistent correspondences between the qualities of experience that somebody would have at a given time and where the planets were in the sky in relationship to their horoscope or their birth chart, which is where the planets were when they were born. That really surprised us, because we both were educated in a cosmology, a worldview in which astrology is completely negated. It's a superstition. In many ways, astrology is what we would say in English is the gold standard of superstition in our culture. So we were very surprised to find that it had any validity at all. And so we studied it first very closely with the individual therapeutic process and spiritual emergencies, and people were going through dramatic transformations psychologically. But then, having seen those correspondences, I started doing research for larger number of famous public cultural figures. Like, I'd look and see, well, where were the planets at the time that René Descartes wrote the Discourse on Method, the cogito ergo sum, and what transits, what planetary transits did Galileo have when he first turned the telescope to the heavens and a whole new cosmos opened up to him. So I just started looking very systematically at that, and was just quite astonished by the correlations. So the two books that I've written, this one here is more, this is The Passion of the Western Mind. This is a history of Western thought, from Socrates and Plato and the ancient Greeks up to the postmodern period. And this is used in like a lot of universities, not in France though, but in the United States and the UK and also Latin America and some Asian countries. And then 20 years later, so I wrote that in 1991, right, in the 1980s. I finished that in 1991. This one I published in 2006, and Cosmos and Psyche. This is the work that sets out the planetary correlations with our world history. So, in a way, one is esoteric, astrological. The other one is more mainstream, traditional history of philosophy.
So you said just earlier that there's a certain alignment of planet that allows us to be to have this connection to the cosmos, and it's kind of opening in one's life all of a sudden. Like you can really read that by the planet aligning in a certain way.
Well, the idea is that we found certain consistent patterns where particular planets would tend to be lined up with a person's horoscope or birth chart at the time that they were having major breakthroughs. Also crises too, or it wasn't only one type of experience, depending on which planets were involved, and also on factors that didn't have anything to do with astrology, but on what a person's background was, or what their circumstances were. But what we noticed was that the planetary alignments seemed to be archetypally predictive, not concretely predictive. Like it didn't tell us, like you couldn't look at somebody's transits and say, oh, you're going to fall in love on July 15th, 2012 on a beach in Hawaii with a particular person. But what you could see is during a certain period of time, there'll be a certain quality of experience that could involve, let's say, the opening of horizons to new relationships or new or also aesthetic experience, or could be a certain new sense of beauty, or even falling in love with nature or something like that. You can't just look at the chart and say what the concrete specific. You get more of a general archetypal flavor or quality, and then depending on other factors that could be biographical specifics and what culture it's happening in. Like a woman who's born in Afghanistan has much different potential for actualizing what is in her birth chart than a woman born in Paris or Copenhagen or San Francisco. So it's as if the larger circumstances that we're in shape the ways in which these archetypal principles come through. Also, one person could have a breakthrough turning the telescope to the heavens. Another person has a breakthrough from having a spiritual awakening that would be more specifically religious.
So what are some of those archetypes for spiritual awakening, for example? Is there some that...
Yes. I mean, what we see most consistently for spiritual awakenings is there will be generally the planet Uranus, how would you say it in French?
Uranus.
Uranus would... that tends to be the planetary, the planet that is transiting people's charts at the time of various kinds of sudden changes, awakenings, breakthroughs, and depending on what it's touching in the chart, it could be more romantic, or it could be more intellectual, or it could be more spiritual. The spiritual ones often seem to have the presence of Neptune.
Water.
Well,
No?
yeah. I mean, Neptune is as an archetype does have something to do with water, and the in a sense archetypally it's like the divine ocean of consciousness, the realm of the spiritual, the imaginative, the intangible, poetic dimension of prose existence. Okay, like the prose part of life is what Saturn rules, the concrete table here, or the Newtonian Cartesian world. That's more Saturn, while Neptune represents, if Saturn is the prose, then Neptune is the poetry. If Saturn represents the facts in a kind of concrete way, Neptune represents the spiritual, intangible dimension of everything that is in the material world. Okay, so it's usually those two, usually Uranus and Neptune are usually factors in spiritual awakenings, and when those two planets come into major alignment for the whole world, like where they come into conjunction in a world transit or opposition, which is like the new moon or the full moon, only it's these two planets, we see 10 or 15 year periods of major spiritual awakenings. Births of new religions tend to happen historically, like the birth of Christianity, the birth of Islam. It also can be like cultural renaissances and periods of kind of paradigm shifts of the cultural vision. But very consistently you see really like waves of new spiritual and religious impulses will come into a culture, and globally at the time of those Uranus and Neptune alignments. I give about 70 pages of the tracing, going back to the axial period when the 6th century BC or BCE, which is when the beginning of like Buddhism, when Buddha lived, and when the beginning of Taoism and Lao Tzu, and when the great Hebrew prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel were reshaping the Jewish faith, and when at the same time in India Mahavira was beginning Jainism, and at the same time in Greece Pythagoras and Thales were beginning Greek philosophy. So right across the major civilizations there was a simultaneous awakening.
And this is happening too right now, because I just heard that there's an end of a Uranus cycle actually ending in tomorrow. Is that true? On February?
Oh, that's 11th? That's different.
That's different, huh?
Yeah, that's Uranus is leaving the tropical sign of Pisces, the fish, and moving into Aries.
Okay.
But that's a short cycle. I mean, it moves through that every 84 years. It goes all the way around, and it only takes approximately 8 years to go through a particular sign.
But is that spiritual awakening that you're talking about on a world level, are we approaching it too as we're just ending one of those 84-year-old cycle? Are we close to it on a world level for something big happening? I mean, what are you seeing in your forecast for this year and beyond?
Well, Uranus has already moved into Aries once earlier last year, and then it moved retrograde, and then going forward. This is
getting a little technical then.
Well, exactly. It's what's called retrograde movement. It's because, of course, the Earth is moving, Uranus is moving. They're both moving around the Sun, and so you get complications in the movements of the apparent movements of the planets. But to make a long story short, yes, I mean, generally what we found is there's a group now here in the San Francisco Bay Area of about 70 or 80 researchers, many of whom have come out of this school, California Institute of Integral Studies, and we've founded a large group called the Archetypal Research Collective. It's about 70 or 80 people. There's a journal called the Archi Journal of Archetypal Cosmology that you can access online, spelled ARCHAI, Archi, the Greek word, archijournal.org. And so we've been doing that research for 20, 30 years at this point. And what we found is that the signs, like Aries or Pisces, they are significant. They seem to color the energy, but they're not as significant as the alignments like of the planets, like the conjunction of two planets or the opposition. And what we're finding right now is we are right now in a very important world transit that involves bringing, in which actually 4 different planets, 4 out of the outer 5 planets, have come into a configuration that's called a T-square. 2 planets are in opposition, and a third one is in a like that, and then it happens that this year a 4th one is conjoining Uranus. So Jupiter and Uranus are here. What we find is that those alignments are where the action is. That was much more important to know, for example, that Pluto or Saturn or Uranus was conjoining your moon at the time that you were doing having an experience like a holotropic breath work or LSD or shamanic ritual in South America. It was much more important to know that the planet was forming a conjunction or an opposition to something in your birth chart, like your sun or your moon or your Jupiter or something like that. Much more important than what sign it was in, which would be like Aries or Gemini. The Aries or the Gemini, the Scorpio, those color the energy, but they don't have the same dynamic significance that the alignments do. And what we're getting right now is this lineup where I won't get too technical, but basically
some people enjoy that too.
well, basically 2 of the planets have come into an alignment for the first time since the 1960s. So from 1960 to 1972, Uranus and Pluto were in conjunction. And during those years of the 1960s, early 1970s, we saw really the whole world go through this kind of radical breakthrough, sudden change in every part of human experience. Politics, psychology, the sexual revolution, independence movements, civil rights movements, women's feminist movement, ecology, psychedelic revolution. Many things were happening. Rock and roll. Paris in 1968 was happening May of '68 in the same way we had here in Berkeley and in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or New York, San Francisco, but all around the world. Radical changes. Yeah. Rolling Stones had that song, "Everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet." And that's what we have again now. Those 2 planets have moved into the next alignment called the square since the 60s. And that will go from roughly 2007 to 2020 for another 10 years, another decade, or another 9 years. And so astrologers who've been studying this have felt for quite a while that we were going to see a period where there would be a lot more revolutionary energy in the air, people on the streets. There'd be more, women would start becoming more empowered. Also, typically, youth, young people becoming politically active and rebellious. Very typical. Another period like this of Uranus and Pluto was the 1787 to 1798 period when the French Revolution happened. And in fact, right when, in 1789, when the Bastille, of course, happened, that's when Jupiter, which tends to bring about more expansive success to whatever it's lining up with, Jupiter came into this alignment with the revolutionary energies of Uranus and the Pluto, and that was right when, that only lasts for about a year, and that's right when the Bastille happened, and the Egyptian and the case in both Egypt and in Tunisia happened right with when those three planets, Jupiter, Uranus, and Pluto, were all lined up again. Now, one quick thing. I don't want to give the impression that there is a kind of mechanistic causal relationship between the planets being here and human beings having these experiences. It's more like, it's not like a kind of Newtonian gravity or electromagnetic radiation or something like that coming from the planets and making things happen, like a billiard ball hitting another billiard ball. It's not like that.
We also have free will, right? I mean, we have the opportunity to choose and to respond to this energy in certain ways.
Exactly, and one of the reasons that I believe that human freedom has a purchase within this astrological cosmos is that we're not looking at forces that are like material, linear, causal forces. They're more like they're archetypal energies that can express themselves in different ways. So you can have, in one country, the same energies can come through as violent revolution. In another country, it can come through as a more peaceful, self-disciplined expression of the same impulse for radical change, but with a different concrete character. Same thing, in a private, individual way. A person might have a transit that tends towards, let's say, some kind of separation or moving towards feeling like one needs to be breaking away from a confining structure in order to be free. Well, for one person, that might result in a very difficult divorce, but another person could work out a different type of, like a new sense of mutually supported freedom within a relationship, for example. And just knowing where the planets are doesn't tell you, oh, this is going to be a divorce, or this is going to be a violent revolution, or whatever. There's always the potential for human freedom to play a role in how it comes through.
So it seems like, as an astrologer or astrologists around the world really tap into their intuition also. It's a big part of understanding and of interpreting, isn't it? Like, the biggest astrologer are probably the most intuitive ones?
Well, certainly the intuition is helpful, but it's not only. It's a balance, because one has to study carefully the patterns and see, well, what really has happened each time. So you see a consistent pattern, and then you can say, okay, here they're coming again, these planets. We notice there's been a pattern of revolutionary decades that have coincided with this alignment. And then we could, and so, for example, I wrote in here, quite 6 years ago now, 2005 is when I wrote the section talking about the current period. And I said, we'll typically see the women being more empowered during this period. the activation of youth becoming more politically, socially active. The environmental movement typically has been more empowered, but there's also a tendency towards greater, because Saturn came into the T-square, I said this particular period of 2008 to 2011 tends to be a period when there's financial crises. Stock market breakdown, that type of thing. As we see in the last time those three planets came into the T-square with Saturn was 1929 to 1933, which was a period of great economic crisis and so forth.
So it's studying the history at the same time. It's very scientific. It's very a holistic discipline. Huh?
That's right. I mean, so there is a kind of very scientific, careful, methodical observation, but you have to have an eye, what James Hillman calls an archetypal eye, or Hillman or Jung would speak of it as like a capacity for symbolic discernment, where you can see symbolic patterning, and you can see the similarity between a person having between the person who turns the telescope to the heavens, like Galileo, and another person having under the same transit having beginning a civil rights movement in the United States, or women's movement like Betty Friedan. You can't. So, what is the similarity there? Well, it's the archetypal kind of Promethean principle of the breakthrough, the change, the radical, the rebellion against the oppressive limitation of the status quo. So.
But it's interesting because yesterday we were sitting in your class here, and you talked about what's happening this summer. Some important dates are ahead, and it can turn out in many different ways. Again,
right.
There's both sides here. It could turn into rebellion,
yes,
major rebellions, or it can turn out into some huge peace movement or some huge new initiatives.
Well, what I was talking about there was really it's a continuation of what's happening right now.
Yeah.
It's just that the planets will be moving into a tighter alignment this summer, but it's already happening, and has been going on. This T-square has been going on really very strongly since 2008. But this summer it comes through for a final close pass. And what I was pointing out is that depending on how the human community and individual countries enact these energies, we could see either a tendency towards a more sense of progress towards freedom and democracy. That's one very typical possibility. But another is a tendency towards chaos, towards a social political turmoil and ferment that can be violently chaotic.
Like 9/11, you were saying that was the last time this transit came
well,
around?
that was one of the. See, right now there's 4 planets involved. That one in 9/11, 2 of the planets, Saturn and Pluto, were in opposition, and so that particular cycle is also happening now. So there is some tendency towards like fundamentalist or reactionary empowerment, conservative empowerment,
tyrannism,
more tyrannical, and so I was mentioning you have both the potential for strong democratizing movements towards freedom, but also the empowerment of reactionary and conservative or fundamentalist forces. And so you get often a balance between the rebellion and then a crackdown, and it differs from country to country as to how things will come out. I mean, even in Egypt, it's different now than it was last month.
Is that depending also on the reaction and how people are going to react?
Very much.
And then does that influence the whole planet? And then you have to rebirth another chart? I mean, how does the dynamic work out?
Well, it doesn't change the planets' positions.
Yeah.
But what happens is the archetypal forces that are associated with the planets, when they come through us in a particular way, then that will shape the future, so that the next person that comes into that field has new opportunities that would be different than if the people before them had actualized or enacted that archetypal energy in some other way. Because there's a kind of collective unconscious that is constantly, that we're all participating in. There's a kind of world soul that we're all, anima mundi, that we're all embedded in and we all are participating in. And how you act in your life shapes how other people respond to those energies, even if they don't know about what you did, because we're all interconnected. There's like in
one field.
There's like one field that we're all, that unites us all, even if you aren't getting on the telephone and telling people this is what I did. It still ripples out into the kind of psychic field, or what Irvin Laszlo would talk about as like the A field, or the Akashic field, that we all, that kind of, or an anima. I think of it as the Latin words anima mundi, the soul of the world, which is another way of saying Jung's collective psyche or collective unconscious.
It's very interesting, the dynamic between our creation and what's already written and all of that. I guess it's a big part of what you must have discovered in depth too during your work.
It's been an important part, and because it makes the ideas of somebody like Jung, or like Stan Grof, or like Whitehead, or Bergson, it gives those ideas new illustration, so we see, oh yeah, that's how it works. And it also, I think, empowers us to have a sense of responsibility for the whole and for the future, because what I'm doing in my life isn't just my private affair. It's going to ripple out to the future and for other people, and so we're all in it together.
And it's time for us to get that. I was going to ask you, so what are the, there's new planets that are being discovered too all the time, isn't there? I mean, is astrology evolved?
Particularly these
Tell
last
us about
15
that,
years.
and how that has impacted astrology in general.
Well, first of all, the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, those were big, unexpected new discoveries, and astrologers studied very carefully, what tended to happen when those planets were in alignment with a person's chart, or when they were, prominent in their horoscope. And after decades of close observation, there came to be a consensus about their meanings. And right now, among modern astrologers, there's a complete consensus about the meanings for those three planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But the planets that have been discovered in the last 15 years, we are just starting that research. We don't have enough of a database to have conclusions about their meanings. So we're still.
What are some of them? Could you tell us their names?
Well, like Sedna is one, and Eris is another, E-R-I-S. Those are two of the most important ones. They're part of a whole trans-Neptunian belt called the Kuiper belt, and Pluto is one of those outermost planets. I think, in a way, what those discoveries mean already, we can see, is that they're opening up our sense of the solar system to a more galactic, to the larger galactic field that our solar system is embedded in. And instead of being, it used to be that everything was enclosed within Saturn. Saturn was the outermost planet known to the ancients up until the telescope was discovered, and then 1781 when William Herschel discovered Uranus. But up until then, everyone thought Saturn was the furthest planet, and then after that it was the fixed stars were much further out. Well, now we have had Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. That opened up the solar system much more, and these most recent discoveries are starting to, in a way, dissolve the boundary line between the limits of the boundaries of the solar system and the larger galaxy that we are part of.
And therefore of ourselves too.
I think so. I think it's moving us, just as Stan Grof's work moves our sense of the human psyche from being a more individual, like skin encapsulated ego, to use Alan Watts's term, and moves it into really a kind of cosmic psyche. Like the whole cosmos is inside each of us, and we are continuous with the cosmos. We're not. Well, just as Stan Grof's psychology opens up consciousness and each of our own individual consciousness to the whole. In some sense, these new planetary discoveries, astronomical discoveries, are opening up our local cosmic ego of the solar system to a larger galactic and cosmic consciousness in some sense.
And you see also in your own work the 21st of December 2012, is that also something that you find there as a major date?
Not
as the Maya do, or not?
There's nothing especially significant by from the observations of past planetary alignments that point towards that date. But I think 2012 has become a kind of symbol of a widespread sense in the human community that we are at a threshold of deep transformation. And the Mayans, and of course there's some controversy about different interpretations of the Mayan astronomy and Mayan prophecies, but the fact that there are a number of prophetic traditions that do point towards something around this period is worth paying attention to. I mean, it's some kind of the human intuition is working at something, and even apart from being a prophet or a clairvoyant, you can see just with your eyes open that the Earth community is at a turning point. And I personally doubt that that particular date in December of 2012 is going to be totally like a light switch going off or on or anything just like that.
But it's over a period of time.
That's right, over a longer period of time. Clearly, we are in a time of profound transformation, and I think that the work that many of the people that you've been interviewing represent a kind of preparation for us to be able to undergo that transformation more intelligently and more creatively, so in a more life-enhancing way.
Did you get ever interested through your studies about other lives and other planets? Is that indeed you came across that?
Well, I certainly am interested in the whole idea of karma and reincarnation, which perhaps Stan Grof might have talked to you about the results of consciousness research and so forth. But I don't personally have any, I don't know, the life on this earth is already exciting enough to me.
Yeah.
So.
Very, very great. This was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man. Thank you.
Unfortunately,
really
I have
appreciate
meetings and lectures to go to, but
this was awesome.
Well, I've enjoyed having my conversation with you,
Thank
and
you.
I hope that your your work and all these interviews are able to reach a large audience that can that would be interested and will receive it.
Yeah. Thank you very
welcome.
much for your time. Much love, my beautiful.